Today, we're going to dig into a story you probably think you know inside and out, but our source material? Well, it's got a twist that might just completely change how you look at every single tough time you've ever been through.
So let's just jump right into this. What if that lowest point in your life, what if it wasn't the end? What if it was actually the beginning? We're going to explore this really powerful idea that our biggest trials aren't punishments at all, but they're plantings. Plantings for a future you haven't even seen yet.
Okay, so let's dive into our first section, From Pit to Planting. And to do that, we're going to look at the story of Joseph. You know the one, but let's see what happens when we look at it through this completely new lens.
I mean, when you think about it, Joseph's story is it's a brutal downward spiral, right? He starts as the beloved son, the favorite. Then, bam, he's betrayed and thrown into a pit. Then he's sold as a slave. And if that's not bad enough, he ends up in jail, totally forgotten. It just seems to go from bad to worse to unimaginable.
But this is where the source material just flips the whole thing on its head. It says that pit, it wasn't a prison, not at all. It was actually a plot of earth. Think about that. A place where a seed, Joseph, was being intentionally planted, sown for a purpose that was way, way bigger than he could have ever imagined.
And that brings us to our next section, which is all about the death of a seed. Because here's the thing about planting, right? For a seed to actually grow, something has to die first. So the real question is, what part of Joseph had to die down there in that darkness for his true purpose to finally begin to grow?
You know that famous coat of many colors? Well, this perspective argues it wasn't really a gift. It was a symbol of pride. It put Joseph up on this pedestal, a pedestal his father built for him, not one that God had prepared. So the pit, that was absolutely necessary. It was the only way to strip away that old, unearned identity and start building something real, humility.
And listen, this was not an overnight fix, not even close. The source material points out something really powerful. The pride and identity that were built up in him for 17 years, it took a staggering 12 years of hardship to undo all of that and rework him from the inside out. 12 years!
So what did those 12 years actually look like? Well, you can think of it like germination. First, he had to be separated, totally isolated from everything he knew. Then that old identity had to be stripped away. It was a time of incredible spiritual pressure, of real toil. All of it designed to build this unbreakable, divine tenacity he was absolutely going to need for the future.
And this whole idea, this whole process, it perfectly lines up with a core principle we see later on, straight from the words of Jesus. Except a corn of wheat fall into the ground and die, it abideth alone. But if it die, it bringeth forth much fruit. It's this universal truth, isn't it? Something old has to die for something new and abundant to be born.
Okay, so that leads us to our third section, the purpose of the fruit. I mean, what was the point of all that? All that pain, all that preparation, what was it for? Well, the key insight here, the real game changer, is that it was never, ever just about Joseph.
And this is so important. The preparation you go through, your time in the pit, whatever that looks like for you, it's almost never just about you. It's for the people you're connected to, the people whose lives you are destined to touch and in some way to nourish.
You can see this incredible parallel playing out here. Look at Joseph. He was sown into that pit, into that dungeon, and the result, the fruit, was that he could provide spiritual food to save an entire nation from famine. And then you have Jesus, who was crucified, died, and buried. He was sown into the earth and became the fruit that saves all of humanity. It's the same pattern, just on an ultimate scale.
Now, let's be super clear about what we mean by spiritual food, because it's not about bread and wheat. The fruit that Joseph produced, it was things like godly wisdom. It was guidance. It was a divine perspective that nobody else had. It was this restored connection to God that was so powerful, it led an entire kingdom, even Pharaoh himself, to look up and recognize a higher power. That's the real food we're talking about.
All right, section 4, let's bring this home and talk about how this ancient story is actually a blueprint for believers today. How do we take this and apply it when we're navigating our own pits?
And the source material gives us this fantastic quote. The preparation process is not a microwave process. It's a never-ending system of learning. I love that. It's such a critical reminder, isn't it? True growth, the kind that lasts, it just can't be rushed. And maybe that's why some people stumble. They're looking for microwave results, but God's working on a slow-cooked, deeply rooted transformation. And what's so wild is that the tests Joseph faced back then, they're the exact same tests we face today. Think about it. The test of lust with Potiphar's wife. The test of money, managing finances in a foreign land. The test of idolatry, being surrounded by false gods and worldly pressures. And maybe the hardest one of all, the test of faith, just enduring that isolation and believing God is still there. These are timeless struggles.
So what do we do with this? The takeaway is this: be a warrior prepared in silence. Use those times of quiet hardship, those pit moments, to go to war with and conquer the very same forces that are holding back the people you are destined to help. Your battle is not just for you, it's for them.
And this really brings the whole thing into sharp focus. Think of your calling like this. Maybe 20% of it is for your own personal salvation, for you to get right with God. But the other 80%, the huge majority, that is all about serving others. It's about you becoming the source of nourishment for the people connected to your life. So, we're going to leave you with this final challenging thought. What if you could re-examine every struggle you're facing right now? Not as a setback, not as a punishment, but as the fertile ground where your future purpose is actually taking root. The question, then, is a personal one. What fruit is your current pit preparing you to bear?